This is the Tombigbee Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi on the Tombigbee River called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode has been a long time coming, and it validates a lot of the work I've done earlier on this podcast concerning our local visitors bureau and tourism in Columbus, specifically dealing with the former director, Nancy Luke Carpenter. The Columbus Lowndes Convention and Visitors Bureau, referred to as the CVB, is funded by taxpayers through a 2% restaurant tax. Public funds are transferred by the CVB through a discriminatory grants process. The CVB is filled with accounting errors and questionable ethics practices that lack the transparency required for public funding under Carpenter's direction. This would be preceding the current directors of the Lowndes County Convention and Visitors Bureau. This would be dating previous to April 1st of 2024. All of the discussions in today's podcast will be from 2011 until March 31st of 2024. These actions have plagued the agency since 2011 and have resulted in significant financial losses. The CVB, former CEO Nancy Carpenter, at the time was also employed by the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation as their executive director. The Cultural Heritage Foundation, sometimes referred to as CCHF or the foundation, is a recipient of CVB funds distribution. The CVB board purchased office space from the CVB's board treasurer, Mark Castleberry. This is their former treasurer. Now, let's get into the actual information. This comes to me from a filing that was done in 2020 to the State Auditor's office or the State Attorney General's, excuse me. And they were interested until someone intervened from higher up and ended the investigation. But I digress. In 2008, the homeowners for the local pilgrimage home tours, an 80-year-old event, added the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation as a community partner. This partnership relieved the homeowners of making the schedule, printing the brochures, and payrolls responsibilities for their employee, Nancy Carpenter. The director's salary with the CCHF was to be funded through grants, shifting the burden from the homeowners. The homeowners were given a designated seat on the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation board. In 2010, while still retaining her full-time position and salary with the CCHF Foundation, the director, Carpenter, accepted a full-time position with the Columbus Convention and Visitors Bureau, the CVB, and became a salaried employee of both organizations. In 2019, the CCHF dissolved the homeowners' designated board seat. Homeowners were not notified of the decision. Citing years of declining ticket sales, lack of communication, false reporting to the media, and the board seat elimination, the homeowners voted to end their partnership with the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation beginning in 2021. The foundation's reaction was to immediately end its relationship with the pilgrimage homeowners despite receiving grant funding for the 2020 event. To assure the public funds were not wasted, the homeowner's new partner, the Preservation Society of Columbus, immediately notified the grant source, the CVB, of the partnership change. The Preservation Society requested grant funding from the CVB at the same level the event had been funded in previous years. The request was to simply transfer the funding from one 501c3 to another for the same event with the same partner. The CVB refused any discussion of the grant requesting, stating that $117,000 taken from the foundation's 2016 federal tax returns was not the correct funding amount, despite what was listed from the previous grant on the tax returns. Homeowners and CVB CCHF board member asked the question, if $117,000 is not the correct cost of pilgrimage, what is the actual cost? Through document requests beginning in November 11th, 2019, the following infractions were found. The CVB purchased office space from a CVB board treasurer, Mark Castleberry. The legal work for the purchase was handled by a partner of the board attorney, Chris Hemphill. Board member DeWitt Hicks, an attorney, secured a higher appraisal for the office purchase in order to get more funding for the expansions and office furniture, etc., etc. In the recent past, CVB CEO Nancy Carpenter, former board member Mark Castleberry, and former board member DeWitt Hicks controlled all aspects of the organization. Board members Worley Bird, Liz Terry, and past member Bernard Buckhalter, who have questioned any component of the process, have been ignored or intimidated. This resulted in a board that was disconnected with the activities of the organization, a lack of transparency, and a budget that, for years, had been out of control. Fortunately, that has changed since Carpenter has been removed from the CVB. In 2013, DeWitt Hicks, Mark Castleberry, and Nancy Carpenter increased the salary of the CEO position, aka Nancy Carpenter's job, without the board's knowledge or consent. Discrepancies in the CVB's 2011 audit revealed Carpenter's unauthorized credit card purchases. Carpenter was using her corporate credit card for personal purchases, even though she would allegedly reimburse said purchases. She was also making significant purchases for the organization at exorbitant rates. DeWitt Hicks and Mark Castleberry led the board to limit credit card purchases to $1,000 unless prior board approval. For years, there have been many concerns over Nancy Carpenter's spending, excessive ordering of event food, wine, and flowers for personal use, McCarty pottery for a 2016 event decoration that has never been accounted for. I do believe it is the same McCarty pottery piece that is found in a 2019 and a 2020 ad, which Carpenter mentions to one of the ad agencies that they need to credit that it's a McCarty pottery in the picture, and the photograph is taken in Carpenter's own personal home. Expedited printing and shipping charges for event items that were put off to the last minute, creating excessive spending, and then additional excessive spending on advertising with Mississippi State University to receive tickets and box seats for personal use. Public funds transferred by CVB board members to an outside 501c3 corporation, the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation. The foundation is controlled solely by the same board members with no outside oversight. The foundation is funded with more than 90% government funds. Currently, it's funded by, I think, 98%. The foundation does not fundraise for the CVB and has a 5-year revenue expense loss at the time of this report of $79,488 per their 2014 through 2018 income tax returns. The foundation does not have 1/3 public support. And upon the dissolution of the corporation, its assets should be distributed for one or more except purposes. Past independent audit reports have stated that the foundation is a legally separate entity. The 2018 audited financial statement has the organization as a discretely presented component unit of the CVB. The CCHF, aka the foundation, exceeds the amount budgeted by the CVB, and funds are transferred without the corporation applying for additional funds and without the CVB board's prior approval per September 2019 board minutes. The CEO of the CVB, Nancy Carpenter, also serves as executive director of the foundation and is a salaried employee of both organizations, working the same hours in the same office and using the same office equipment. Per 2017 tax returns and the Attorney General's opinion to Chris Hemphill. The CVB accounts for all its activities in one special revenue fund. Formal budgetary integration is employed as a management control device during the year for the special revenue fund. These budgets are adopted on cash basis, which is not consistent with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. The CVB omits requirements of the general accounting standards such as management and discussion and analysis, per an audited financial statement of September 30th, 2018. The financial statements of the foundation were not audited in accordance with government auditing standards, also from the audited financial statement of September 30th, 2018. CVB board members were given a copy of the audited financial statement in past years. At the July 2020 board meeting, the board was asked to blindly approve the annual 2019 audit. Board members were denied access to the document before the vote. It was not available either electronically or hard copy. None would ever be available. The CVB board voted to approve an audit they had never seen. July 20th board minutes. Budget cuts are not allowed once the budget is approved. However, funds can be increased, transferred, and reallocated without prior knowledge or approval of the board, according to a September 19th and a February 20th board minutes. Prior to the 2017 federal tax filings of the foundation, it had been signed by an officer of the corporation. In 2017, the employee, Nancy Carpenter, signed the tax returns per their 2017 federal tax returns at the foundation. Public funds are transferred in the form of grants to organizations without the advertised application of guidelines being followed or reviewed by a committee. Other organizations found the process flawed to the extent that the legislature added a mandatory payment to them in the 2% restaurant sales tax in 2019. The CVB did not at this point follow the posted application and standard guidelines for grant funding. The process lacks transparency and organizations were not treated the same. The CVB funds one-day events and sporting events. However, the application at that time stated that one-day and sporting events were not eligible. Some grant recipients were not required to complete the application. Those who do not meet the application requirements were deemed special projects. Other recipients were dismissed without the knowledge of the review committee. The foundation is funded with an open checkbook controlled by Nancy Carpenter, per a September 16, 2019 board meeting report, grant application, and grant guidelines that were dated November 21st, 2019. A further finding of this report to the state auditor, false and misleading financial reports were made to the public. The CVB stated that they made ends meet thanks to two grants, one for $20,000 and one for $16,000, and very careful advertising. In reality, the CVB spent $207,900 and provided funding to the Columbus Cultural Foundation of $71,514. The CVB estimated between 8,000 and 10,000 people attended pilgrimage, despite 1,200 half-day tickets being sold in reality. Most visitors purchased 2 tickets per day. This will be reported in the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation and the CVB Pilgrimage Profit and Loss for the year 2018 to 2019. This audit goes on to report false and misleading reports to the CVB board and public regarding funding. The CVB stated in November of 2019 through the board attorney, quote, "There are no funds in either the CVB or the CCHF budgets or bank accounts quote, available for 2021. In February of 2020, CEO Nancy Carpenter and new board president Steve Wallace reported to the public that funds would be available, never informing the board or the public of the previous letter. Thus allowing known false statements to be entered into the CVB and the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation board minutes. On October 8th of 2019, a foundation special meeting, board member DeWitt Hicks, an attorney, stated that the foundation had legally acquired all the rights to pilgrimage, knowing that statement was false. On November 14th of 2019, homeowners and of the Preservation Society notified the CVB of the decision to cancel Pilgrimage 2020 to begin again in 2021. Carpenter, Wallace, and Chris Hemphill concealed the notification from the board for November 2019 CVB board minutes and a Chris Hemphill letter dated November 15th, 2019. In November 21st of 2019, Nancy Carpenter and Steve Wallace sent a denial letter for 2021 grant funding without board knowledge approval and failed to acknowledge it when questioned by Liz Terry in the November board meeting. The acknowledgement failed again in December when the November minutes were approved. Board members requested to correct another issue in the minutes, resulted in a no vote. December 2019 CVB board minutes and a Hemphill letter dated 11/21/19. In January of 2020, Steve Wallace stated the pilgrimage would go on, once again concealing the cancellation letter and the funds denial letter. In February of 2020, Chris Hemphill reported the CVB's plan to use the name Columbus, Mississippi Spring Pilgrimage to hold a competing event was acceptable, stating Mississippi would separate the two events with little or no impact. The Mississippi Secretary of State disagreed, revoking the service mark. Mark Castleberry stated the Preservation Society had no business plan for the event, knowing the plan was never requested. Castleberry stated the Preservation Society asked for a lump sum that the CVB cannot fiscally do, knowing the money had already been allocated to the foundation, which voted not to hold the event, and that it should make the board uncomfortable, especially dealing with taxpayer money. In June 2020, board member Sonic Johnson asked Chris Hemphill to request an attorney general's opinion on an issue. Hemphill told Johnson that the attorney general had stopped writing opinions because the office was short-staffed. If this situation had in fact occurred in the attorney general's office, surely Hemphill knew it was not permanent. Let's address the excessive waste of public funds that were included in the state auditor letter. Hiring an attorney to answer and dissuade a board member request of financial documents that are needed to fulfill the responsibility of a board member. This was a letter from Chris Hemphill to Whirlybird, dated May 28th, 2020. Hiring an attorney and an accountant to answer a simple document request, charging $350 to electronically produce. To date, previously requested pilgrimage payroll records showing names and amounts had still not been received. Hiring an attorney to dissuade a public records request and intimidating grant applicants. Per Hemphill letter dated 11/19/19, another dated 5/28/20, and a CVB CCHF November 2019 special meeting. The CVB providing an employee, Nancy Carpenter, with a $1,000 monthly car allowance for a luxury automobile with no accountability. In 2018, the CVB, using public funds for a 10-day event, spent $285,600, including $37,752 for part-time employees, to produce $37,000 in ticket sales. In 2019, $165,409 was spent and produced $40,000 in ticket sales. A 2-year combined total of $451,000 spent to produce $77,000 in ticket sales per the Foundation Pilgrimage Profit and Loss Statement and the CVB Pilgrimage Profit Loss Statement. Concerns about accounting. The CVB grossly exceeded the 2019 approved budget. The budget change appeared and monies transferred without board approval. The CCHF exceeds the amount budgeted by the CVB monthly, and funds are transferred without the corporation applying for additional funds and without the CVB board's prior approval. The CVB's accounting listed portions of legislatively mandated funds as local grants, while the majority is listed as income expense. Hemphill stated regarding how restaurant tax monies are dispersed, quote, the CVB is to be paid monthly with the leftover after monthly payments set by the interlocal are dispersed. The CVB does not receive the legislatively mandated monies. However, it is included in the income and expense statement and local grant statement. Some program expenses of the CCHF are reflected in the CVB income and expenses, and mostly referring to the pilgrimage profit and loss statements. In the pilgrimage brochure, Friends of the Foundation ads are sold for $75 each to offset the cost of printing. The ad revenue, however, is not reflected. The amount listed on the federal income tax return section 8(1)(f) for grants, contributions, and gifts is a similar amount per the Foundation's pilgrimage profit and loss tax returns. In 2017, line item 4302 reflected a $6,675,000 Tennessee Williams grant. In 2018, the grant was zero. In 2019, Nancy asked the board for consideration of the development of the lawn of the Tennessee Williams home. She asked the board to discuss the pros and cons of the plan of gardens with statues approved by the CVB board years ago. The original grant funding included historic signs marking specific sites in Tennessee Williams' life. These signs were not erected, and there's been no accounting of that appropriated money. Where did the money go? Below are some of the CCHF pilgrimage profit and loss statements from 2018. $8,891 in kickoff party expenses with no associated revenue, even though tickets were sold to cover the cost of the event. $305 in silent auction revenue with no expense recorded or relationship to the event. $5,720 in entertainment without an association. Tales from the Crypt is listed as program revenue, and it is a donation. Homeowner reimbursement, $39,200, is $5,000 over the actual payments. So where did that other $5,000 go? Some accounting comparison issues. The CVB 2018-2019 approved budget is inconsistent with the year-end statements. The foundation list in the program review and expense categories had pilgrimage revenues $56,000, marathon and Catfish in the Alley at $21,000, pilgrimage tour expenses as $89,000, the expenses for Catfish at $15,000. The marathon is not listed in expenses, and equipment rentals is listed as $1,484. Here are some of the items as they appear on their profit and loss statement. Total pilgrimage revenue, $70,000. Total pilgrimage expense, $80,000, which doesn't match the previous list above that had $89,000 for expenses, a $9,000 difference. Revenue for the marathon was $21,244. Granted, that's just $1 off, but there's still an inconsistency. The expenses of the marathon are listed as $17,164, and they were not listed in the CCHF program revenue and expenses. The CVB listed the marathon as $10,000 as special projects. However, the marathon is also listed in the foundation pilgrimage event profit and loss statement. This $10,000 is therefore counted twice, once in the CVB accounting and again in the foundation accounting. And that is a significant amount of discrepancies and variations and unaccounted for behaviors and dollars. So based on this letter to the auditor from previous board and involved community members, it's really clear to me that my previous as well as my current investigative work into Nancy Luke Carpenter's reign with the CVB as its director were correct and absolutely on point. Carpenter's incompetence in money management and program management demonstrates how much financial and community image damage she has done to our local tourism. It's commonly known that if you ask anybody if they'll be involved in something related to tourism, they say as long as Nancy Carpenter has her hand on any of the money, they absolutely will not be participating. With the CVB's shift in board leadership, and with the retirement of DeWitt Hicks and the removal and resignation of board attorney Hemphill, the board has now become more focused on proper oversight and following the letter of the law for more open meetings, records requests, and financial accountability. But this didn't start until April of 2023. Prior to that, Carpenter's overspending was kind of like a drunken sailor on liberty, and her lack of planning and last-minute purchases and ad designs and her lack of involvement in local tourism-related events while at the helm of the CVB is disturbing at the very least. What is more disturbing is that Carpenter is now only the director of the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation, a non-transparent entity that holds closed board meetings, and because it is a nonprofit, its records, with the exceptions of its 990 tax filings, which they are always chronically behind at that organization, those records are not eligible for public records reviews despite its complete funding by your 2% tax dollars. Yes, you heard me right. The foundation, now directed by Carpenter, operates in complete secrecy with your tax dollars. The CVB has funded the foundation's yearly budget with carte blanche by the foundation's board, based on the Attorney General's ruling. There are 0 reporting vehicles for the CVB to hold the foundation accountable for their spending of said monies on their budget. While this is a conundrum that a state attorney general's ruling created when the two boards were separated, the CVB does not have to provide the foundation any funding. It is not a mandated funding. Why is this significant? Well, the foundation runs the town's Welcome Center at the Tennessee Williams Building, the same building currently under renovation with a sizable grant from the MDAH. The same organization where Nancy Luke Carpenter spends part of her time as the vice president of their board of trustees. And that board of trustees decides who gets the MDAH's grants. Yes, it is a huge conflict of interest for Carpenter. She does sit on the board that decides. It's kind of a giant self-licking ice cream cone. But let's get back to why this matters. In a previous episode, I addressed the shoddy lipstick and Band-Aid preservation work being done to cover up the rot and decay of the Tennessee Williams birthplace due to Nancy Luke Carpenter ignoring that building's decline for the past 8 to 10 years while she's been CEO of that building. More on that in a future episode. Carpenter closed the building mid-April for these repairs, and she laid off her paid staff, and no one knows if the usually hourly paid staff, an line item on their budget for which they got funding in good faith from the CVB, if they're even being paid while out of a job. If not, Is that money going to pay Nancy Carpenter's currently unfunded position as director of the foundation? Who knows? Why don't we know? Because their records are not public, remember? And their board is not transparent, remember, in any way, shape, or form. Knowing all the history of Carpenter's incompetence and lack of transparency at the CVB and at the CCHF, and now with the separated CCHF, aka Foundation, why would the CVB board ever fund another budget for the foundation? Why should our 2% tax dollars be given to a 501c3 as their sole operating budget, where there is zero accountability or responsibility to the public or their funding agency, the CVB? The foundation should be unfunded and it should be dissolved. The CVB should take the Tennessee Williams home back under their purview and operate it strictly as a working welcome center as MDOT intended. Carpenter's cabal at the foundation should be defunded, and if they want to maintain a foundation, let them find another building and write some grants that Nancy Luke Carpenter brags she's so good at crafting, and let them fund their, quote, work, which we haven't seen any of, with their grants. Email the board of the CVB or contact their office and let them know you want them to defund the upcoming budget for the new fiscal year starting 1 October 2024 for the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation. Don't let Carpenter and that quasi-foundation bamboozle another dime from the CVB and our tax dollars. I want to thank you for coming on my podcast and another episode of the Tombigbee Tales. Until next time.